Hi, I'm Jaylyn Allmon, and welcome to my 2025 TED Talk on the development of serial killers. Now, raise your hand if you've ever watched a true crime documentary or show. Awesome. Now, did you ever wonder why these killers killed?
Yes.
Sweet. So my TED Talk is going to be answering the question, what environmental and psychological factors contribute to the development of a serial killer? Now, just a quick personal connection of mine. Growing up, I used to love watching Dateline and Forensic Files with my grandma. I'd force her to put it on every night at 7 after dinner and make her watch them until she fell asleep on the couch. And that grew to make me love watching them today and listening to podcasts every morning while I get ready. Now, I'm going to move into some definitions real quick. First, I have the definition of a serial killer. A serial killer is a person who kills 3 or more people along a period of time. This long period of time is called the cooling off period. This designates them from mass murderers and spree killers because spree killers do not take this long period of time to go back to their normal lives. Then I have an overview of epigenetics. Epigenetics is a change in gene expression without a change in DNA. So a perfect example of this is going to be twins. Twins that have the same genes, but the experiences they experience make them grow into their own unique person. So there's mechanisms in epigenetics. They are known as DNA methylation and histone modification. DNA methylation is a tiny chemical tag called a methyl group that turns genes off. To put this in simpler terms, it's basically a turn-off switch for your genes. Histone modification is when basically the DNA is wrapped around histones, and histones get the menthol tags attached to them, and they can pull on the tags to either make the genes harder to read or easier to read. Now I have gray matter. Gray matter is a tissue in your brain and spinal cord. It is made up of a thin layer of grooves and bumps called gyri and cisternae. This plays a significant role in memory, emotions, and movement. The neurons in your gray matter do not grow back, and they can disappear due to lack of blood to the brain, stroke, brain hemorrhage, and trauma to the brain as well. Signs of loss of gray matter are going to be memory loss, motor issues, etc., things that play with that. Right there, you can see the little gray is going to be our gray matter, and the rest of it is going to be white matter. And then I have abuse or trauma. In this case, trauma is going to be physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, and neglect. And then abuse is measured by adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And now moving on to my actual research. In my research, I found that childhood trauma is a main contributor in the development of a serial killer. Only a small percent of children who actually are abused become serial killers, but the majority of serial killers experience childhood trauma. A study done in 2005 took 50 serial killers and looked into their childhood or made them take the ACEs test. They found out that 50% of serial killers suggest they've experienced psychological trauma, 36% experienced physical abuse, and 26% experienced sexual abuse. Then I have a graph from the study. The red is going to be serial killers, and the blue is going to be general population. On this side, we have the percent of people who experience it. And down here, we have physical, sexual, psychological, neglect, and none. As you can tell, serial killers experience way more abuse or trauma than just our general population, and then about the same amount experience neglect. Then moving into my gray matter research. I looked at a study done in 2020 that took 108 incarcerated men, 203 of which were homicide convictors, and the rest were nonviolent or violent inmates but didn't commit homicide. They used an MRI scan machine to look at the gray matter density of each patient or prisoner. And then right here is going to be a normal brain on both sides on the left, and then the right is going to be a serial killer brain. You can tell with the green and the red that there's a lot more that's going to be the gray matter. There's a lot more in a normal brain than there is compared to a serial killer brain. This study found that homicide offenders had reduced gray matter, in regions linked to brain, behavioral control, emotional processing, and social cognition. So this is an actual graph from my study. This side is going to be the non-homicide, and then this side is going to be the homicidal. So over here you can tell there's a big difference in the gray matter lost, which is the blue and the green, compared to over here when they still have a lot of their gray matter in those certain areas that are connected to social behaviors and memory and just overall areas. And then moving into gray matter and mental health. I looked at several studies done between 2000 and 2018, and they suggest that the loss of gray matter is connected to schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And then I looked at 9 studies done at the same time that proved that these mental health issues are strongly connected with serial killers and their behaviors. Moving on, I'm going to go over some case studies. First, we have Allmon, who was a famous serial killer in the late 80s. She killed 7 men in 1 year. Her mother left her at a young age, and her father killed himself in prison, leaving her and her siblings to live with their grandparents. Her grandfather was sexually abusive, and her grandmother was an alcoholic. She was kicked out at 14 due to a pregnancy from one of her grandfather's friends. She later became a prostitute and abused drugs and alcohol. She was also diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Then we have John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Clown Killer. He raped and murdered 33 young men between 1972 and 1978. His father was an alcoholic who would physically and psychologically abuse him. He would call him names like sissy, wimp, and beat him with a whip or belt. He was also reported to be molested at the age of 9 by an uncle. He was also heavily bullied in elementary and middle school due to his lisp and the fact that he was overweight. He was later diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Moving on, we have David Berkowitz. He's also known as the Son of Sam. He murdered 3 couples during the summer of 1966. He lived with his adoptive parents, who fought a lot, that normally these fights would result in abuse towards him or his adoptive mother. After his adoptive mother died, he started seeing hallucinations and hearing things, so he was later then diagnosed with schizophrenia. How do all 3 of these people connect? So they all experienced similar things growing up through their childhood. They all experienced some form of abuse and had a mental illness that was either caused by epigenetic changes or gray matter. However, all of these claims are uncertain due to the limited research and evidence done on this topic. Since serial killers are so rare, the sample size is so small, and we can't be certain on the evidence proving these claims. Then there are a few applications to my research. First is law enforcement. Knowing how these serial killers are developed are very helpful for law enforcement to catch and profile them. These serial killers' experience lead to violent tendencies that often show to law enforcement on the crime scene. Law enforcement use criminal typologies to profile these serial killers. A criminal typology offers a means of developing general summary statements and concerning observed facts about a particular case of criminals who are significantly homogeneous to be treated as a type, rather than attempting to study criminals as a specific species. These criminal typologies are going to be lust, financial gain, anger, and power. So this is basically the categories that they put serial killers in. Another application of my research is by understanding how these serial killers are developed, we can also further research in finding more mental health awareness to childhood abuse, and possibly to even prevent serial killers from happening or our numbers rising. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
All right, thank you, Jaylyn.